They missed every concert, birthday, and graduation for my brother's emergency. So I gave myself the one day they couldn't ruin, and it changed everything. I never thought I'd be the kind of guy to get married without inviting his own parents, but when you've spent your whole life being an afterthought, eventually something inside you snaps, and that snap came on the day I realized my wedding deserved to be about love, not a lifetime of being sidelined for my brother's fake illnesses. You'd think growing up in a suburban neighborhood just outside Chicago in a house with a backyard and annual family trips would have meant a pretty ordinary, maybe even happy childhood, but the truth was, the moment my younger brother Neil got diagnosed with asthma, the entire world started spinning around him like he was the sun and the rest of us just had to orbit quietly or risk getting burned. I was 9 years old, already beginning to understand that my achievements would never shine as bright as one wheeze from Neil's chest. It wasn't that the asthma was severe, at least, not according to the doctors, but my parents acted like every minor symptom was a 5-alarm fire, and they built their entire lives around keeping him comfortable. At first, I told myself they were just being cautious, that things would even out eventually, but years passed and the pattern never broke. I remember one night when I was 12, I had been rehearsing a piano solo for months, trying to make it perfect for the winter concert. My music teacher said the piece was something only upperclassmen normally played, but I was pulling it off. I told my parents about it, even made them promise they'd be in the front row. I looked for them that night, scanning the crowd with the kind of hope that hurts your chest when it dies too fast. And they weren't there. Neil had another flare-up. Later, my grandma mentioned she called the house that evening and heard Neil laughing in the background, playing video games. My solo was flawless, but it echoed through an empty seat meant for them. When I turned 16, my grandparents flew up from Florida just to be there, to help set up a party my parents promised they'd handle. The cake, the decorations, the simple joy of having everyone you love around you, that's what I looked forward to. But the day of the party, my parents took the car to supposedly run an errand and vanished for hours. When they finally got home, it was after dark with nothing but excuses. Neil needed to go to urgent care. That urgent care visit ended with him being diagnosed with mild seasonal allergies. Meanwhile, my cake was picked apart in the waiting room and what was left barely made it back home. My grandparents, bless them, tried to make things work. They ordered pizza and picked up a last-minute grocery store cake, but I remember sitting on the stairs halfway through the party, just staring at my shoes and thinking, how did this become normal? High school graduation came next, valedictorian of a class of 430, years of perfect grades, part-time work, sleepless nights, and the biggest moment of my life up to that point didn't even earn their presence. Neil was having a panic attack about finals. Finals that weren't even until the following week. I remember my best friend's parents saving me a seat at their table afterward, handing me a card that said how proud they were. It meant a lot, but it also reminded me of what I was missing. College? Don't even get me started. I put myself through it, 2 jobs at a time, diner shifts and lab work, living on coffee and quiet rage. I scraped my way through chemical engineering with a 4.0 while Neil had a fully padded college fund and a prescription inhaler he barely used. By the time I made it to grad school, my parents acted like they were cheering from the sidelines, but they were never in the arena. When I got my master's degree, I saved them seats in the front, reserved a nice dinner spot, planned everything to finally share a win with them. That morning, Neil had a migraine. That night, he posted photos from a party, arm around his friend's red plastic cup in hand, living it up while my parents sat on the couch next to him. So when Jamie proposed and we started planning our wedding, I already knew the kind of pain that could live inside those empty seats. Meeting Jamie felt like stepping into a world I didn't know people like me were allowed to have, a world where accomplishments didn't have to fight for recognition, where love was steady and showed up on time, and where family wasn't a contest of who could create the biggest crisis. I met him at a research conference, both of us nerding out over lab results and mutual exhaustion from sleepless nights buried in grant proposals. We were just 2 scientists trying to make something meaningful out of molecules and equations, but with him, life started to feel like more than just endurance. His family was the kind of warmth that seeps into your bones when you've spent too long in the cold. The first time I met them, I expected polite small talk and stiff hugs. Instead, his mother wrapped me in a real hug, the kind where people squeeze like they actually mean it, and his dad asked me questions about my research like it actually mattered. On my first birthday with Jamie, his whole family threw a surprise party. I walked into their house, saw the decorations, the homemade banner, the candles already flickering on a chocolate cake, and for a second I just stood there like a man who had forgotten how to breathe. I didn't cry because I was weak. I cried because I realized this was what being valued felt like. When I got a promotion at work, Jamie's dad sent flowers to my office with a note that just said, "Proud of you." Jamie's sister framed the cover of my first published research paper. His family showed up for me the way I had begged mine to for years. At first, I kept flinching, waiting for the other shoe to drop, for someone to say something like, "We can't come after all," or "Neil's not feeling well," even though Neil wasn't part of this world anymore. But the flinch never came. So when Jamie proposed, it was never a question of if we'd marry, only how. But the how couldn't include chaos. It couldn't include standing at the altar, wondering if my mother had left the reception mid-toast to go check on Neil's blood pressure, or if my dad was texting from the pews about some imaginary emergency. I couldn't live that again. I wouldn't. We talked for weeks. Jamie never pressured me, he just sat with me through every what if, every memory, every pang of guilt that crept in at 2 a.m. I tried to picture inviting them, tried to imagine them sitting through the ceremony without needing to rescue Neil from an invisible crisis. I failed. Every time. And I realized then I didn't want to remember my wedding as the day I once again came second to my brother's drama. I wanted it to be the day I finally came first. So we made the decision together, no invitation for my parents and no invitation for Neil. It wasn't revenge. It was peace. And even though I lost sleep over it, even though I wrestled with guilt and old scars that still hadn't faded, I held the line. We kept the wedding small. 80 guests. Mostly Jamie's family and some friends we'd made along the way. I invited my grandparents, my dad's folks who had quietly watched the imbalance for years, and a few cousins and aunts who had always understood that something in our family just didn't sit right. I asked them all not to mention the wedding to my parents. They agreed. The morning of the wedding, Jamie's mom helped me with my tie. His sisters were there, smiling in their bridesmaids' dresses, teasing me about how nervous I looked. His dad handed me a watch that had belonged to his grandfather, told me it was tradition now for every groom in the family. And for the first time on a big day in my life, I didn't feel like I was just trying to survive it. When the music started and I stepped out to face the aisle, I didn't look around wondering who might walk out. I looked ahead and there was Jamie, steady as ever, smiling like he already knew what I was feeling. Because he did. And for once, I didn't feel like a second thought. The wedding came and went like a dream. I didn't want to wake up from sunlight breaking through the trees just right, vows whispered through shaky voices, Jamie squeezing my hand like it was the only anchor he'd ever need, and his mom tearing up quietly behind us. For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged in a moment that didn't need to be shared, stolen, or overshadowed. We danced, laughed, and made memories that would never be footnotes to someone else's crisis. But I should have known peace like that doesn't come without cost, not when your family spent decades rewriting your story in favor of the golden child. It started with a cousin, sweet girl, well-meaning, posting a photo from the reception. Just one shot, Jamie and me clinking glasses during the toast, lit by the soft glow of the reception lights, surrounded by people who actually wanted to be there. Harmless, really? But by the next morning, my phone had turned into a war zone. Missed calls, voicemails, texts from numbers I hadn't used in years. The first was from my mother. "You've always resented your brother for things he can't control. You think cutting us out of your wedding was mature? You embarrassed this family." Then came my father, who went full prosecutor mode, accusing me of publicly humiliating them. He even used the words malicious exclusion like he was building a legal case. My parents, who hadn't shown up to a single graduation, recital, or award ceremony without checking on Neil first, were now acting like they were the victims of some cruel betrayal. But here's the part that stung more than it surprised me. Not once did they ask how the wedding went, if I was happy, if Jamie's family had treated me well. They didn't ask what the ceremony looked like, what the vows meant to me, or how it felt to be surrounded by people who finally made me feel seen. They only wanted to know why they weren't included in the pictures. I thought I was prepared for the backlash. I had braced myself for guilt, for anger, for accusations. But I hadn't expected the sheer volume of it. Distant relatives, some of whom hadn't spoken to me since high school, messaged me with lines like, "Your brother loves you, you know," and this was a low blow. Nobody asked about the years I spent waiting for my turn to matter. It was my grandfather, God bless the man, who gave me clarity. He pulled me aside a week after the wedding, handed me a folded piece of paper with a photo from the ceremony inside, and said, "You look like a man who finally stopped apologizing for things that weren't his fault." He'd seen the pattern too, every missed milestone, every false emergency. He told me he was proud of me, not just for the wedding, but for having the guts to draw a line after all these years. But things escalated fast after that. My mother claimed Neil had an anxiety attack when he saw the wedding photos and ended up in the ER. My cousin Kay, who happened to be at a baseball game that same day, sent me a picture of Neil in the crowd, beer in hand, laughing with friends. Whatever stress he was under didn't keep him from enjoying 9 innings and a hot dog. That's when Jamie's mother, who's been a pediatric nurse for over 30 years, stepped in. She called my mom, calmly and respectfully, trying to open a dialogue. She gently pointed out that Neil's supposed health issues didn't align with the lifestyle he flaunted on social media. Hiking, late-night parties, 10K races, you name it, Neil was living it. My mom hung up on her and then immediately called Jamie's sister to complain about outsiders meddling in family affairs. The problem wasn't that Neil was sick. The problem was that my parents needed him to be. They needed a reason to ignore everything I accomplished so they wouldn't have to reckon with the fact that they just didn't care as much. That night, I remembered something I'd buried deep. 17 years old, dressed up for homecoming, waiting in the living room for my date to arrive. I'd spent months saving up for that outfit, dreaming about that night. But 20 minutes before we were supposed to leave, Neil clutched his stomach and wailed. Abdominal pain, sudden and dramatic. My parents rushed him to the ER, leaving me standing there, tie loose and heart heavy. Hours passed. The diagnosis? Gas. Just gas. By the time they got home, the dance was over. I never wore that suit again. The days after the wedding felt like walking through 2 parallel worlds, one full of joy, laughter, and warmth from the people who had finally become my real family, and the other thick with guilt-soaked messages, accusations, and bitter voicemails from the people who were supposed to have been there from the beginning. The contrast was so stark it hurt. On one side, Jamie's family embraced me like I'd always belonged. On the other, my parents acted like I'd committed some unspeakable crime by protecting my own peace for once in my life. Jamie's family went above and beyond, not because they were trying to make up for something, but because it's just who they are. His dad stood in for mine and gave a toast during the reception that brought the whole room to its feet. He talked about how proud he was to welcome me into the family, how he admired the hard work I'd put into my career, and how lucky Jamie was to have found someone who understood the value of loyalty and perseverance. It was one of the only times in my life I felt like someone saw me, all of me, and said out loud that it mattered. My grandparents, who had witnessed years of this quiet imbalance, danced with me at the reception like they were trying to make up for every party my parents had missed. They told me how proud they were, not just for surviving, but for thriving, for standing up and finally saying enough. I could see the sadness in their eyes too, though. They knew how long I had waited for that kind of affirmation. The next day, Jamie's family held a small brunch at their house, inviting relatives who couldn't make it to the wedding. Jamie's mom made this incredible spread: pancakes, fruit, eggs, the works, and his nieces and nephews ran around the yard like it was Christmas morning. At one point, his dad stood up again, raised his coffee cup, and said, "Here's to the best thing Jamie's ever done, marrying someone who brings light into our family." I had to excuse myself for a moment, not because I was overwhelmed by the compliment, but because it made me realize just how starved I'd been for simple kindness from the people who raised me. But reality doesn't let go that easy. My phone kept buzzing with messages from family members, many of them now in full damage control mode. My aunt, my mother's older sister, called, clearly upset. At first, she said I was humiliating the family by leaving my parents out. But after I calmly walked her through everything, one event at a time, every missed birthday, every ignored award, every emergency that just so happened to ruin my milestones, she got quiet. She said something I'll never forget: "Your mom has always made everything about Neil." I guess I just got used to it. She even brought up a family reunion from a few years ago where I had just been promoted to lead a research team. I remember being so excited to share the news during dinner, finally having something big to offer in conversation. But the moment I brought it up, my mom interrupted to say Neil had just started working part-time at a grocery store, and suddenly the spotlight shifted. My achievement vanished like it never existed. My aunt said she remembered that moment clearly and had felt bad about it ever since. Then Kay called, my cousin, the one who had spotted Neil at the baseball game during his supposed ER visit. She asked if she could come over, said she had something to tell me. We met for coffee that weekend. She looked nervous, like she was about to confess a crime. What she said floored me. Apparently, years ago at a family barbecue when they were both teenagers, Neil had gotten drunk and told her he often faked or exaggerated his symptoms on purpose. He said it started off small, just little things to get out of chores or avoid school, but it grew. Every time he got sick, the world bent around him. He admitted it had become a game to see how far he could push it. The worst part? He said he liked the attention, especially when it meant I didn't get any. Kay said she kept it to herself all these years because she didn't want to stir up more drama between us, but after seeing how the wedding went down, she felt like I deserved to know. I was stunned, but I wasn't surprised. Deep down, I had always felt like something was off, like Neil's timing was too perfect, too convenient. I just never had proof. Then she showed me something even more damning: texts from my mom the week before the wedding. In those texts, my mother was plotting ways to create a distraction at the ceremony. Before she even knew she wasn't invited. She said she was worried Neil might not be emotionally stable that day and wrote that maybe he could have a bit of a panic episode during the vows so people remember what really matters. I don't know how I stayed upright reading those words. My own mother was planning to hijack my wedding day for the sake of the same son who had stolen every other moment from me since I was 9. It was no longer just a pattern. It was a strategy. And suddenly all the guilt I had felt, the sleepless nights, the questioning, the second-guessing began to disappear. Not completely, but enough to finally feel like I had made the right call. Because this wasn't just dysfunction. It was sabotage disguised as love. After I read those texts from my mother, those chilling, casual suggestions that my brother act unwell on my wedding day to keep the spotlight on him, I sat in stunned silence, staring at Kay across the cafe table like I was seeing her for the first time. Like I was seeing everyone for the first time. All those years of wondering if maybe I just imagined the favoritism, maybe I was being sensitive or selfish or hard to love, it all vanished in an instant. It wasn't in my head. It was right there, in black and white, plotted out like a sick little family ritual. Kay's hands were shaking when she slid her phone across to me. She said, "I'm sorry I didn't say anything sooner." I told her it wasn't her fault. I meant it. It was a lot to carry, especially when you're watching the rest of the family pretend that kind of manipulation is normal. We sat there for another hour, just piecing through memories like old evidence in a case we never knew we were allowed to try. I remembered the choir solo I was supposed to sing at a summer event when I was 14, canceled last minute because Neil sprained his ankle at a family picnic. Kay was there too. She said she remembered him walking just fine when we left, only to suddenly collapse in the driveway when my parents came out to the car. I remembered the science scholarship program I got accepted into one summer, the one I never attended because Neil had an unpredictable flare-up that made it impossible for my parents to be away from him. They insisted family had to stick together during a health crisis. I suggested they drop me off and I could take a bus back at the end of the program. They told me that was selfish. Selfish. That word kept echoing in my mind. That's what they'd called me for not inviting them to the wedding. That's what they used every time I pushed back, every time I dared to make a choice for myself. But now I knew the truth. It wasn't selfishness they were accusing me of, it was independence. And that scared them more than anything. I tried reaching out to Neil. I don't know why, maybe part of me wanted to believe he'd changed. Maybe I needed to hear him deny it all, just so I could finally cut the last thread without regret. I sent him a message, told him I'd heard what he said to Kay, asked him if he remembered the things he'd done, if he knew what it cost me every time he pulled the focus away. Every time he faked his way into another hospital visit while I sat alone on the biggest days of my life. He didn't respond. Not at first. Kay said she confronted him about the texts. Said she told him she was disappointed, not just in what he did, but in the way he never once tried to make it right. Neil got defensive. Accused her of taking sides, of tearing the family apart. That's when I knew. He hadn't changed. Not really. He just wasn't used to getting caught. Jamie kept reminding me day after day that none of this was on me. He told me I did the right thing. That protecting our wedding wasn't just about avoiding drama, it was about choosing the kind of life we wanted to build together. One where emotional landmines weren't buried in every celebration. One where love wasn't conditional on whether or not someone else needed the spotlight more. His mother even recommended I speak to a therapist, someone who could help me unpack all the years I'd spent doubting my own memories. She said people who grow up in families like mine often need help learning how to receive love without bracing for a slap on the back end. I've been thinking about it more and more lately. Because as freeing as this truth has been, it's also incredibly heavy. My father left me a voicemail 2 days later. His voice was flat, almost rehearsed. He said I was tearing the family apart. That Neil's health was deteriorating because of the stress I caused by excluding him. He called me selfish again, told me that a real son would apologize and fix things immediately. But I didn't respond. Because I finally understood something they never wanted me to know. Love without boundaries isn't love, it's control. And they had spent a lifetime trying to make me feel guilty for setting boundaries that were long overdue. Kay, meanwhile, told me she was starting to pull away from the toxic parts of the family herself. She said watching what I went through made her realize how much silent damage had been done over the years and that maybe it was time to start choosing peace, even if it meant losing people who only showed up when they wanted something. So that's what I did. I muted the texts, blocked the numbers, stopped checking old voicemails, and every time that old guilt started to creep in again, I looked at the photos from my wedding day, the one where I smiled without flinching, where Jamie stood beside me and not a single person had to fake being proud of me. That's the life I'm choosing now. A month after the dust had started to settle after the wedding, the fallout, and the countless messages I never returned, I got an email that I read 3 times before I even believed it was real. It was from Neil. No dramatic subject line. No guilt. Just, I'm sorry. I need to talk. My hands shook reading it. I wasn't ready for another round of blame, another long-winded explanation of how I misunderstood everything or hurt our parents by setting boundaries. But that's not what it was. Neil's email started with a line I never expected from him. You were right to leave us out. Just like that. No excuses. No fake illnesses. No panic attacks. He went on to admit what Kay had already told me, how he faked symptoms growing up, how he learned early that playing sick was the only way to get attention in our house. He said it started small, pretending to feel dizzy to skip school, coughing a little harder than he needed to during a cold. But when he saw how Mom and Dad would drop everything, how even the smallest complaint could shift the entire household around him like gravity, he leaned in. And then he got good at it. He wrote about the ER visits that were planned like rehearsals, the symptoms he memorized from WebMD, the way he could cry on cue by thinking about his pet turtle that died when he was 5. It wasn't just manipulation. It was survival in a household where the only currency was crisis. And then he said the part that broke me, the worst moments weren't when I faked it. They were when I knew you had something important coming up and I made sure I had something bigger. He admitted he remembered the choir solo, the birthday with the pizza and the generic cake, the scholarship program I missed. He remembered me sitting on the stairs in a suit I never got to wear. And he said, I knew what I was doing. I just didn't know how to stop. He told me he started therapy a few months back. Said it began as treatment for depression and anxiety, but quickly spiraled into something deeper. His therapist had helped him understand the damage not just to me, but to himself. How he'd never built a real identity, only a version of himself built around neediness and drama. He said he'd spent his whole life being the center of attention, and had no idea who he actually was without it. And then came the part that changed everything. He found out our mom had been planning to disrupt the wedding weeks before she even knew she wasn't invited. He said she'd mentioned to him, casually, that if something were to happen, people would understand if they had to leave early. At the time, he brushed it off. But after Kay showed him the actual texts, he said he felt sick. He said seeing our mother's words, her plotting to once again steal my day, was like looking into a mirror he didn't want to admit existed. That's when he knew it wasn't just his fault. It was the system they built for him. According to Neil, when our parents found out he sent the email, all hell broke loose. He'd left his laptop open at their house, one careless mistake, and my father read the draft. They exploded. They told him he was betraying his family, that I had poisoned him, turned him against them, and then they did what they always do when their grip started to slip. They threatened him. They said if he took my side, they'd cut him off financially. That hit hard. I knew Neil still depended on them. They paid for his car, his apartment, even his groceries half the time. His job at a friend's startup barely paid anything. And yet, in his email, Neil said something I never thought I'd hear from him. I'm done. He said he was looking for a new job, somewhere out of town. Said he'd found a studio apartment he could afford on his own, even if it meant downgrading his life. He told me he didn't want anything from me. Just a chance to meet up sometime, face to face, and talk like real brothers for the first time in decades. I showed the email to Jamie. He read it slowly, then looked at me and said, You don't have to decide right now, but it sounds like he's trying. And he was right. After everything Neil had done, after all the lost moments, part of me still wanted to believe in the possibility of redemption. Not for our parents, but maybe, just maybe, for the brother I thought I'd lost to a lie. I haven't replied yet, but I'm thinking about it. In the meantime, Jamie and I are preparing for a move. He got an offer at a research institute in Boston, an opportunity too good to pass up, and I accepted a position at a biotech firm out there. New city, new home, new life. It feels like a clean slate we both desperately need. Neil said he'd like to visit someday, if I'm willing. As for my parents, they've been alternating between furious and pathetic. One day they're calling me ungrateful. The next they're begging me to come home. But none of their messages mention the past. Not the missed milestones, not the sabotage, not even Neil's confession. They talk about their pain, their humiliation, their reputation in the family. But never once do they talk about mine. That silence is louder than any apology. We left for Boston in early spring. Boxes loaded, goodbye hugs from Jamie's family still fresh, and that strange, weightless feeling that hits when you realize you're really starting over. I remember watching the city shrink in the rearview mirror, thinking how I spent nearly 3 decades fighting to be seen in that place, to be heard, to matter. And now I was just a man with a ring on his finger and a second chance in his pocket. The apartment was small but bright, sunlight spilling through the windows every morning like a clean beginning. Jamie and I unpacked our lives box by box, coffee mugs and framed photos of our wedding, and the occasional piece of our past we hadn't decided whether to keep or throw away. Every time I opened a drawer and found an old ribbon from a science fair or a class photo from my valedictorian year, I felt a little more detached from the boy I used to be. The one who sat on the edge of his bed waiting for parents who never showed up. It was in that new place, with a fresh start and the ghosts of the past finally quieting down, that I replied to Neil's email. I didn't say much, just that I'd read his message, that I appreciated his honesty, and that maybe when we were both ready, we could meet for coffee. Kept it cautious. He understood. He wrote back, saying he was proud of me and that no matter what happened between us, he wanted to be better than the boy who used to fake asthma attacks for attention. That alone told me something had shifted. Meanwhile, my parents hadn't let go. Their messages had changed tones again, from guilt to rage to now something new, desperation. They'd somehow found out that Jamie's mom had spoken to my mother, probably through some distant relative. My mom left a voicemail claiming that Jamie's family was trying to destroy hers and that I was being brainwashed into believing lies about my childhood. The irony of it almost made me laugh. After all these years, they were still rewriting the narrative to make themselves the victims. They hadn't even acknowledged Neil's confession. I waited. I gave them time. But the apology never came. Not once did they say they were sorry for all the birthdays they missed, all the ceremonies they abandoned, or the wedding they tried to sabotage. Not once did they ask about my new life or how I was doing. They only talked about what they'd lost, their reputation, their control, their access. A week after settling in Boston, I got a call from Kay. She'd finally had enough too. She told me she'd distanced herself from them after my wedding, but what sealed it was what came next. See, my mom had been going around telling people I had manipulated Neil into turning on the family, that I'd used Jamie's family, our wedding, and even my new money job to twist everyone against them. Kay didn't buy it. Instead, she showed those same family members the screenshots, the ones of mom planning to sabotage the ceremony, the ones Neil had confirmed were real. She told them the truth. Slowly but surely, the tide began to turn. A few cousins who had been cold toward me sent messages apologizing. One uncle, who had once called me too sensitive, reached out to say he'd been wrong. But not everyone came around. My parents doubled down. They told people Neil had mental issues, that therapy was corrupting him, that I was poisoning the family against itself. It was the same old pattern. If they couldn't control the narrative, they would destroy it. And then came the final blow. My parents showed up at Neil's apartment unannounced, stormed in, demanding answers, threatening to pull financial support. According to Neil, my father said something like, "You can choose us, or you can choose the brother who never wanted you around in the first place." Neil asked them to leave. He said he wanted to live his own life. My mother cried. My father slammed the door. They haven't spoken since. A few days later, Neil called me. Hearing his voice again after all those years of bitterness was surreal. There was a tremble in it, like he wasn't sure he had the right to call me brother. We talked about nothing at first: traffic, Boston's weather, how his job hunt was going. Then we talked about our parents. About the damage. About the silence that grew between us all those years because they never let us be anything other than opposites, one who had to need everything and one who was expected to need nothing. Then he said something I didn't expect. They didn't just hurt you by ignoring you. They hurt me by making me believe I couldn't survive without being broken. That hit harder than anything else. Because I knew it was true. We talked for almost 2 hours. Not as enemies. Not as strangers. Just two brothers trying to dig out from the rubble of a family that buried us both in different ways. Jamie sat beside me the whole time, silent, supportive, present. When the call ended, he pulled me into a hug, the kind that says you're safe now, and whispered, I'm proud of you. And in that moment, I believed it. I wish I could say everything wrapped up neatly after that call with Neil, that the truth healed the wounds and the rest of the family came around, that we finally became the kind of brothers who text about sports and share dumb memes. But life's not a movie. Truth doesn't always fix what time has fractured. Sometimes it just gives you permission to stop pretending. Neil and I talk now sporadically without pressure. It's not some magical, close-knit bond, but there's honesty in our conversations, and that's more than we ever had growing up. He tells me about his new job, a real one this time, no favors or pity paychecks. He's renting a tiny apartment across town from our parents, paying his own bills, learning to live without the spotlight. He's quieter now, humbler. There's still guilt in his voice sometimes, and I don't think he's ready to forgive himself yet. But I'm working on forgiving him. Not for his sake, mine. Because I've realized something, holding on to resentment, even when it's justified, is like drinking salt water when you're thirsty. It never quenches you. It just leaves you aching for peace. My parents, though? That's a different story. They've gone full scorched earth. After Neil cut them off, they started sending long emails, first to him, then to me. Some were filled with venom, you're ungrateful, cruel, selfish. Others were cloaked in nostalgia, remember Christmas when we made gingerbread houses? As if one decent memory could erase decades of damage. But the most recent message, that one was different. It came from my father. Short, almost cold. He said they were washing their hands of this entire mess and would no longer attempt to contact either of us. He claimed they were done being disrespected and that Neil and I could reap what we've sown. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just more blame wrapped in the language of finality. And for once, I didn't feel the urge to respond. Not even to defend myself. Because I finally understood their silence isn't a loss, it's a relief. Jamie and I settled into our Boston life like we were meant for it. The work is challenging but fulfilling. Our apartment is small but full of laughter. Some nights we sit on the balcony drinking coffee as the sun sets behind the brownstones and talk about the future, not the past. Not them. Just us. What we're building. What we're becoming. The photo from our wedding sits framed on the hallway table. It's simple, just the two of us holding hands under that white arch, surrounded by the people who chose to love us without conditions. It reminds me that family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the people who stay when things are hard, who show up even when there's nothing to gain. I still think about that little boy I used to be, the one who sat in empty auditoriums waiting for parents who never came, the one who wore a suit to a dance he never made it to, the one who used to believe that maybe next time they'd care enough to show up. I think about him a lot. And when I do, I whisper, we made it. Not because they finally saw me, but because I stopped needing them to. So if you're reading this, if you're the one who's always been second, the one who got pushed aside, the one who watched someone else's pain eclipse your joy again and again, let me say what no one ever said to me when I needed it most. You're not wrong for drawing the line. You're not cruel for choosing peace. And you're not selfish for wanting a day that's truly your own. I had mine. And it was everything I hoped for. The beginning, not the end.